Hi, everyone. Christopher here. I decided to do something different, something that I've done in the past. Jubilee has just put out a video of Candace Owens being surrounded by 20 feminists talking about issues relating to feminism. One conservative versus 20 feminists. And I thought to myself as I was watching just a little bit of the first bit, it would be cool to do this like a watch along because I think there's opportunity to discuss this in a meaningful and open way that's not combative. And sometimes, as much as I really do enjoy commentary on both sides, the names that bubble to the surface, the Candace Owens, the Charlie Kirks, the Ben Shapiro's on the right, they often go down a path of combativeness when to me that takes away from legitimate concerns. So in this video, we're going to do a little watch along, and I'll pause regularly through the video, and we're going to pick it up. The first person who Candace sat down with, I don't think she did a great job articulating her point, and Candace called her out rightfully on that. So we're going to pick it up from the second person. Again, I haven't watched any of this, but we're going to do a little bit of a watch along together. If you're liking my content, definitely hit that like button and subscribe. And I thought to do a live stream because you'll get my reactions in real time. So here we go. And I'm going to share, and this should work. So let's go. Okay, the claim is the sexual revolution has devalued women and made them infinitely less happy. It's a claim by Candace Owens.
Hello.
Hi there.
How are you? I'm Candace.
Nice to meet you. Julian. My pronouns are they, them. It's very interesting to think of it when we just think about the gender binary. It's, how do we place value on human beings in general? And so when we think about, placing value, that comes from a place of power, right? So I think let's select like the Victorian era. You have this dominant group of people coming from white supremacy, deciding who gets to have a proper status in the world. And so that is already like taking human beings and devaluing them. And so what the sexual revolution did was to help people seek out empowerment, which increased value no matter the gender. So when it comes to sexual revolution, let's look at one contribution is sex education. I'm actually an educator. I teach sociology and LGBTQ studies. And I have absolutely seen the positive outcome with the sexual revolution and sex education and seeing people empower themselves. And with that comes safety when it comes to decreasing STIs, abuse, sexual assault. Again, people get to empower themselves of all genders. And I know earlier you mentioned about violence amongst lesbians and sapphic community, which I do identify within. All genders can be subjected to violence.
That was the point I was making. So I wasn't sure of how her claim was relating to what we were talking about, whether or not it makes people happy or unhappy. Relationships are obviously a ground where there can be violence.
I guess I could just wrap it up by saying, like, if we all have access to like sex education through the incredible work of feminists through the sexual revolution, we are able to gain access to information and gain skills to create an equitable society, egalitarian within our relationships, whether it be platonic or romantic. I'm so grateful for those feminists who have fought for us so we can gain those spaces and create a healthier society.
Okay, so the way I would answer this, because I think that there's a lot of misconceptions. Now, this is a very big topic, obviously, but the one thing I would say, and I've heard this from teachers and educators, that they've seen the real benefit of education and experiential learning as real indicators for changed behavior. I would argue that teachers and educators have interacted with a lot of people, but they have to also remember they're interacting with a small subsect of the population that's one willing to learn about sexually transmitted diseases and sex education. They're willing, obviously, because they're in their class. And second, that they're dealing with people who may, in the moment, say that they're more educated or they're more learned about a specific action, say sexually transmitted diseases, but it doesn't necessarily mean that would translate to lifelong sustained changed behavior. I remember doing this for financial literacy classes. doing some research on that. And some researchers found that, in the moment, people would attend these financial literacy courses and they may open up their eyes to debit and credit and learn how to be better. But to sustain that kind of behavior over 10, 15, 20 years, their entire lifetime, requires them to be actively engaged in learning about that topic repeatedly. And so this is the fallacy sometimes I find educators fall into, where, let's say they do a course on sex ed, they do a course on sexually transmitted diseases, and they see that there are people who came in, say in September, they had certain opinions, and by, January, February, March, their opinions have changed. They've become much more liberal, or they're much more educated, they're making more informed choices, which is great. I mean, I think that's awesome. But it's not necessarily indicative, first of all, of the general population that could happen. Second, it's not indicative that through an educational experience, people will naturally make better life decisions. I don't believe that. I don't think there's enough research to show that. I don't think. I could be wrong. But I would say that that's some of the fallacies that teachers fall into. And then the other thing, and I'm not saying all teachers, obviously, but the other thing with that argument too, there's a lot of confirmation bias. So, or just bias in general, right? So again, when you're dealing with a group of people who are open to learning, open to understanding sexually transmitted diseases and sex education, again, you're dealing with a group of people who are, open to understanding and willing to say, you know what, maybe I do need to learn more, and are willing to change. That's not reflective, again, of the general public. And that would be my response. Like, let's not use, I mean, definitely as a teacher, we need to use your examples, yes, but let's not then say that this is reflective of the general population when it comes to the sexual revolution. I'm going to share it and see how Candace Owens replies, because that's how I would reply.
Okay, are you a believer in the government doing everything that it can to make people happy?
So when it comes, as someone that teaches them,
so you see, like, this is the argument that I've seen a lot on the right, and they typically go down the path of, big government, right? And so that's the angle Candace is taking. And again, it just pits us versus them, and it's not really reflective and thoughtful, in my opinion.
the public sector, I understand the concern when it comes to what is a teacher, what kind of information they're providing to the students. I do believe that we, as a teacher, I should be able to give that sort of information. Again, I teach college students. One of my claims is I believe that we should mandate sex education amongst college students. So yes, I do want the state, I would like the government to give us those resources so
you can see here the reason why that she's having the response. Sorry, they're having the response to Candace's question because they're a teacher. So if you are going to ask about, well, should the government fund this program, this teaching program? Of course, an educator most likely will say, yes, we need more funding because of X, Y, and Z. When again, I think the conversation should actually be whether or not education as an intervention actually works to change behavior. And I just don't believe it does.
Can implement that curriculum.
Okay. Are you consider yourself a feminist, I'm assuming?
A queer feminist. There's variations, right?
What is a queer feminist as opposed to a feminist, just so I understand?
Well, so I heavily believe in queer theory. So, the gender binary that we understand, it comes from colonization. So someone who is mixed race, family from Mexico, we have the Mouches in Mexico, which is an indigenous tribe. They believed in gender fluidity. And then you have European colonizers coming who dismantle that. And now everything that we understand when it comes to gender is a Western lens.
So this is where, this is where I really struggle with some on the left, because when they start talking about colonization, to me, it doesn't really get to the heart of the matter. You see, when Candace pushed her about, is she a feminist? Or sorry, are they a feminist? I keep saying she. Are they a feminist? The person said, I'm a queer feminist. And then it just kind of, it should have been more, I'm a queer feminist, and here's how this differs than what you may consider a feminist to be. 1, 2, 3. And then when the person was pushed on, you know, what does this mean? The conversation dovetailed into colonization. And this is precisely where you lose most moderates and those on the right, because colonization is an economic system, it's a political system, yes, but the connection between that and feminism may be much more nebulous. It needs to be tangible. People need to actually see in real terms what that tangible connector is. Otherwise, you're going to lose people when you start saying colonization and Western-based thinking. It has to be very tangible. And I would encourage people who are using these arguments to be very tangible and very direct in your approach when you're discussing it.
So from a
So
queer,
you don't even think women exist, I'm guessing.
I think everyone should be empowered to figure out their identity and explore the language that best describes themselves. So freedom, America, right? America, freedom. And I want to believe in that when it comes to identity.
Right.
Everyone should have the freedom to decide how they want to identify, as long as they're not causing harm. But that's where we get into the debate, what is harm?
So just, again, to be clear, to go back to this claim, we are debating female happiness.
Mm-hmm.
You are saying you do not identify as a female.
I identify with all gender expressions. So from masculinity to femininity. So
I'm just saying.
So this is, again, where I really struggle. And I know Candace is laughing here, but again, how I would approach this is I would really struggle to understand how I can respond meaningfully when someone identifies with all genders. And this is not me trying to like degrade anyone, but when we're talking about feminism, it's hard for someone who does not identify as a feminist or with any gender to then debate this point. It gets really challenging for me.
Are you just saying that as a part of queer theory, you're debating what
women, they don't want to stay at home when you pull them. They just want.
What happened? No, what happened? Sorry, folks. I don't know what happened there, but I was having a great conversation. Okay, so let's just go. Sorry.
Whether or not women are happier after the sexual revolution? I'm just trying to understand, because it seems like you're debating queer theory as opposed to female.
I believe all genders benefit from the sexual revolution.
You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
And so this is the thing I would say, again, I know she's getting like a standing ovation here, but like the thing I would say is I think I sensed that she was struggling a lot in making her points and she was getting very emotional. And this is the challenge I find, again, when we talk about these topics, is that there's a lot of emotion in the conversation. And, you know, some of these topics are emotional. But when you're having an honest conversation, when you're trying to explore things like from a genuine, open, curious lens, you have to be willing openly to say, I might get emotionally, I might get hurt here. Like I might uncover an opinion that might, you know, really rattle me. And I have to be vulnerable enough to have that conversation. And if I can't, I should not be part of an open and honest dialogue. An open and honest dialogue is actually quite scary to a lot of people, because I don't feel like we know what the ground rules are. We just go right in. But to me, the obvious ground rule is you have to be emotionally centered to have a conversation. And I sense that this person was not. Okay, let's keep it going. Sorry, folks. I'm rambling, but I think it's going in the right direction. Let's go.
Hello.
So
Zena.
close.
Zena, very much like your name.
Thank you so much.
Zena
Nice to
was
meet
great.
you.
Can we start with the
Jordan
beginning?
Peterson.
Do you identify as a female?
I identify as a woman, yeah.
Okay. There we
Right.
go.
So I do want to like get back to your premise. You're saying that women have been devalued, right, by the sexual revolution. This like kind of presumes two things. One, that there has been a loss of worth, right, for women. So you're saying that women have, as human beings, lost worth. Women who prior to their sexual revolution were worth more than women today.
I would say that, yes, women have devalued themselves by becoming overtly
According to
sexual. That's my claim. So, I mean, also according to just, and let's not remove this from the other part of the claim, which that it has made women infinitely less happy.
Right. So are you saying, but you're saying that according to you, women have been devalued?
Not according to me. According to the time in which people are getting married, how difficult it is for people to find a partner that's willing to commit to them. And I think that's in large part due to the fact that women are offering sex for free, because it was a major component of the sexual revolution was this idea.
So a woman's worth is tied to.
Okay, Zena is great, by the way. She's a great debater. I don't know if anyone saw her on the Jordan Peterson Jubilee one, Surrounded. So finally, we have someone who's actually asking Candace about the definitions of her statement. Remember, the claim is the sexual revolution has devalued women and made them infinitely less happy. Again, the operative words there are devalued and infinitely less happy. So no one, the first two people who came up did not ask her specifically what she means by devalue and infinitely less happy. Now, Candace says that is her claim and it's based on research, but she hasn't really articulated that. And the infinitely less happy we'll get to in a second, but I'll see how Zena continues this line of questioning, because I think this is actually precisely where a lot of people on the right and the left stumble, because they make these very egregious claims and then they have trouble themselves defining what those claims, those terms are.
To her sexuality.
It's not tied to, well, absolutely. If you're going to be having multiple partners, you are going to be devaluing yourself.
You're worth less as a human being.
Not as a human being, just, in terms of trying to have a partnership and a productive relationship. Certainly men are not going to be clamoring to have a relationship with somebody when there's the market is growing them.
Okay, so this is, you see, you can see Candace struggling here, because again, the definitions, this is a great freeze frame. See the girl in the middle, her face is hilarious. So to me, this is a clear example again, and it's no knock on Candace. But it is a challenge that both the right and the left have, which is defining terms. Now, what I'm gathering Candace is saying is that because women are having more sexual partners, or some women are having more sexual partners, it's devaluing them. But I think what Candace means is it's making them less attractive to a long-term male partner, because a male partner who wants a long-term relationship would not want, in Candace's framing, would not want a female with multiple partners. That's the way I'm looking at it. And perhaps there is research to support that. But Candace is really struggling defining that term and that phrase, that way she's defining devalue. So let's see how she goes with it.
A man's response to your actions is what defines your worth, right?
Yeah, well, I would say that I would argue that what makes women actually happy is family. So if you're interrupting, so just to connect the dots for you, when women are having sex with multiple partners, it devalues them for men, right?
For men. So,
yes. So
men define a woman's worth.
Well, I would say both of them kind of define one another's worth, because I think the ultimate goal for people to be happy is actually family.
So that is really interesting, and I disagree with Candace there. I'm not saying that because I'm single, but the reason why I'm saying that is because this is something that I've noticed in the West as well. And I live in Toronto, and I grew up in Canada, in Toronto. But the thing is that there's this over-reliance on relationships that is unique to the West than any other culture in the world, which is interesting, because you think that other cultures would place high value on relationships and family, which, of course, cultures do, but not to the extent of the West. In fact, I would argue that if you look at any spiritual religious text as a base to understand other cultures, there's not one religious text that I know of, please someone correct me if I'm wrong, that says that the pinnacle of your existence is to be married and have children. There's nothing there that says that. Instead, most religions, the common thread is you have to go through self-inquiry in your life to figure out, why you're here, how to live a good life, live a life in accordance with that, have positive thinking, etc. There's a whole host of steps for self-inquiry, and that is the purpose of existence. But often I find quite conservative thinkers here in the West confuse the pinnacle of life as to being in a relationship, married with children. Jordan Peterson does this all the time. And I think they're conflating a few things. They're conflating that there is research, I believe, I remember reading this in Psychology Today somewhere, that if someone is married with children, that chances are their overall happiness, their stress levels are lower, their sense of worth and well-being are higher. And again, we'd have to go into the statistical analysis to see if that's the case and repeatable. I wouldn't necessarily argue with that, but that would probably be in very specific circumstances where the relationship is mutual and there's a loving relationship, there's support from both families, there's an income level, there's a whole host of other factors that factor in to that scenario happening. So it's not to say that that's not a good thing. I think it is, but to suggest that it is the pinnacle to existence is the fallacy that I find conservatives in particular fall into. I personally don't believe it's the pinnacle. The pinnacle to life to me, or if you want to see it as a pinnacle, it's actually life is a journey. Let's just be real. It's a journey. You go through ups and downs. But to me, the journey is self-inquiry. It has to be. You have to go through life. You have to understand your emotions, your moods, your mental health, your emotional health, why things make you upset, how you can correct that behavior, the thoughts behind those behaviors, how you can lead a more positive life to your family and friends and those in your community, how you can be more selfless in your actions, how you can do things and let go of the outcomes. All of those things combined to me is the pinnacle or the journey of life. If along the way you get into a relationship and you have children, that's a blessing. But if that does not happen, I don't believe your life is less. You know what I mean? And I think that is the fallacy that I see a lot of those on the right fall into. Jordan Peterson has done full-on lectures about, getting married and having kids. And I think that's important for some people, but it can't be for the entire population, because the entire population, again, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to look at divorce rates and all this stuff is a lot of work. And again, to me, self-inquiry is the thing that everyone should be focused on. Okay, that's my soliloquy on relationships, but let's get back to what Candace is saying, because again, that's one of the fallacies that I see.
Okay, so you're saying
Not work.
in all cases, a woman is going to be more fulfilled in regards to family.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
And this is going to work in all cases. So you're saying there's no individual case in which a woman can feel, fulfilled without being tied to other people in the case of family.
I think there could be an exceptional case for everything. I think there are exceptional cases, but I think that if we all start trying to be the exception as opposed to recognizing the rule, which is that people in life are more fulfilled when they achieve a family unit.
Okay, so I'm glad that they included some research here. Now we can debate Pew Research, because I know at times they sometimes say things that we don't always agree with. Okay, but they did a fact check, and they say there's conflicting research on this topic. Pew Research found that a higher percentage of adults want a career or close friends to be fulfilled compared to kids or marriage, while the Institute for Family Studies found married men and women are happier than unmarried counterparts, largely because they have a family support system. Now, again, I'm glad that they've tried to unpack the complexity of this topic, but Candace should be very genuine in her statement to say, this is my opinion and it's based on what I have seen. I can't correlate this for the general public, but based on my own experiences, this is what I've seen. But I know if she were to do that, that would kind of delegitimate her argument.
And when they have children, women in particular, especially aspiring to children, then you are going to end up with a bunch of people who are unhappy because your job cannot replace the feeling of having a family.
So what you're saying is we need to look at every individual case and see what is going to fulfill you, or what is going to, I guess, essentially predict your happiness more. Because if we look at, for example, the Nordic countries, right? These are countries, I'm talking about like Sweden, Denmark, right? These countries tend to be like, I think in the past 14 years, they've been ranked as the highest in happiness and marital satisfaction from women, right? And we see that they also have been the most open in regards to like, sexual norms and sexual roles, right? So, and we also see that there's less rates of like STDs reported. We see more, and that's also due to comprehensive sex education that's pushed in those countries. So we see that
This is where I lose Zena, because I don't believe that lower STDs is a result of sex education. It could be a whole host of factors. Sex education could be a factor that factors in, but it's not because of sex education. You see, again, this is a fallacy I see, again, both the left and the right. They look at things through a very black and white lens, because the gray is very difficult to unpack. There are multiple reasons. Remember, it could very well be that there's more general public awareness of STDs versus taking a sex ed course, as an example. It could be that there's less sex happening. You know, I was reading a study that Gen Z somewhere that is like having way less reported sex than millennials. So there could be other reasons that are confounding in this.
Result of the sexual revolution, right? So when we're seeing that direct reports of happiness, right, we don't have these same rates in America. In these countries that are more sexually open, why would we see like those rates in those type of countries?
So I think you might be referring to this sort of mass-produced study that was a part of like a behavioral science study, which said that women were the happiest women in the world were women that were actually unmarried and had careers. No, okay. Well, there was
reported happiness.
Okay, sure. I'm talking about the same thing. It was reported happiness, but it could be a different. There's tons of studies. The point being is that in 2023, there was this massive scandal where they recognize that a lot of these studies that were being produced, behavioral science, was proven to be a complete fraud, and they were unable to reproduce.
Oh, wow. So, okay, so they do a fact check. They say in 2023, Harvard investigated Dr. Francesca Gino for fraud. She was accused of manipulating data in 4 papers published from 2012 to 2020. She was investigated by the university and suspended without pay, and the school is trying to revoke her tenure. So clearly we see some issues there with the studies that are being put forward.
Produced these studies, and they also found that the data had been faked. The data that we can look at that I think shows, and you can let me know if you agree with this, if women, and under the imagination of the feminist umbrella, were really unhappy when they were in the home, and then entering the workforce has made women happier and infinitely feeling more secure about themselves, we could, I think, reasonably expect that there would have been a decrease in suicide rates amongst women.
You would have to go ahead and show how that correlation, right, is going to be a direct cause of women going into the workforce.
Okay, well, how can we, let's measure, then you have to give me a way that we can measure happiness. How can we measure happiness? So I would say suicide rates would be a good thing to look at. Drug, alcohol consumption would be a good thing. Of course, right? But we would have to,
we can say, I can say at this point in society, I don't think everyone is happy. I think there's a lot of things that we need to reconcile in society.
That's what I'm getting at.
Right, so but we have to look at the cause, right? Why are these things predicted, right? And for example, if we talk about men, there are a lot of things we can look at, right? That tend to predetermine suicide, right? But we can't say, oh, these 2 things are happening at the same time. This caused this other thing.
Yes, that's right. But I do think that we can objectively say that women who are committing suicide rates more than they were in the 1950s, like it has actually increased marginally. That's not a sign that us entering the workforce suddenly.
So Candace should have said depression and anxiety instead of suicide, because women are in fact less likely to kill themselves, but are more likely to be more depressed and anxious than men. And it's in not every study, but in many studies it shows that. So that to me is something that Candace should have picked up on. Now, again, I think the challenge for Candace in this situation, which she hasn't done a good job of so far, it's only been about 14 minutes, but she hasn't done a good job about what she means by devaluing women. And I think Zena's trying to get that, but Zena's arguments too are also a bit combative and flawed too, because she's not being clear with Candace about pushing her on what she means by devalued. Again, I think I know what Candace means, but she hasn't done a good job of sharing that.
Made us
how is it
happy.
A cause of the workforce?
We're also binge drinking at a higher rate.
How's this cause of
opioids at a higher rate?
How is this a cause of entering
Because
the
I think women are being put on a pathway aspirationally.
But you're going to have to. You're saying you think this, right? But where's the cause? Like you're not substantiating the claim. You're saying this is what I think. I'm seeing 2.
Okay, pause. You've been voted out by the majority.
Oh,
Please
wow.
return to your seat.
Thank you so much.
That was so surprising that she got voted out, because I thought she was. You see, this is the thing with Jubilee or Surrounded. I thought she was doing a great job. I thought that was really bang on, and Candace was being held to task, put to task, and she just got voted off. The conversation was going where I think it should have gone, which is pushing Candace on defining what it is precisely. And Candace was saying things like, oh, there's more drug and alcohol use, there's more, binge watching Netflix. I mean, of course, that's happening. Candace, if you pushed Candace a little bit more on that to say, okay, tell me how that, first of all, is statistically different than men, and how that correlates to them being devalued, would have actually been a worthwhile conversation. So I'm surprised that they ended, or that the group voted her off, because I thought it was going so well. Okay, well, we're going to keep going. Give me a second. Here we go. Again, I thought that was great. Zena's a great debater. Oh, Zena tried to go back.
Hi, I'm Nikki.
Nice to meet you.
So when we're talking about the value of women on a societal scale and how we view each other, right? When you're devaluing us, you're objectifying us. And follow me, I promise. But rape rates have gone down by about half in the last 20 years.
Okay.
Right? So if you're saying we're less valuable now, why wouldn't we be suffering at a higher rate?
So
Okay.
is the
So the way I would answer that is, okay, so the person is saying that if you're saying that we're being devalued, that means that, chances are we would be sexually assaulted at higher levels. But the reality is that sexual assault levels have actually gone down over the past few years, which is interesting. I did not know that. I would have assumed the other way. So it's a really good question. But I think the way Candace would structure this answer, as I understand it, it's not about a man sexually assaulting a woman that she's saying devalued. From Candace's perspective, as I understand her perspective, is that the revolution has devalued women in obtaining a long-term male partner. So even if sexual assault levels are going down, devalued to Candace, that doesn't factor in. What factors in is this woman attracting a long-term male partner? It has nothing to do with the sexual assault rates. I could be wrong. Let's hear how Candace answers.
the argument that you're making, just so I understand, that because women are giving up sex for free, they're not being raped?
Every study shows rape is not correlated with just sexual gratification. It is a power structure.
Okay.
So it is about objectifying and abusing women when you rape them, not about whether or not you want sex. What I am saying is that women are less objectified, so therefore we are being raped less.
Okay.
See, so that's a fallacy, right? So that's a fallacy that I understand to the argument. So rape is about, or sexual assault's about power. There's less sexual assault, so there's less of that. So women are being objectified less. That's where that argument falls apart, because objectification isn't tied only to sexual assault. Objectification could be anything. It could be visual objectification. It could be in magazines and in our over-sexualized culture, which, by the way, I don't know if anyone's actually realized this. Western culture is overtly sexualized, like super overtly sexualized. And I think women are being objectified in many, many avenues. It's not. So I think that's the fallacy of this person's argument, that they're thinking that only objectification only happens in sexual assault.
So you think that in today's society, because this is pretty wild for me. In the 1950s, you're saying women were more objectified than today in the land of OnlyFans, the Kardashian clan, and women that are essentially putting up their boobs and butts for free on Instagram. You're saying we finally have achieved less objectification, where women can't even get onto an advertising. You can't even advertise a bag without them having to be naked in order for them to get a career as a model. You're saying, oh, great, we've achieved actually less objectification.
So I'm not trying to suggest
it's like it's a flamboyant point, but it's a much more flamboyant point than I was trying to make, which is a much more nuanced point, which is there's way more objectification of women in our societies today.
I think that the over-commodification of women's bodies is positive. But what I am saying is that when you're going to the 1950s, that we shouldn't put this glazed look of, oh, it was so happy. We had single income households and we got to stay home. We also had a pill popping problem. We also were viewed as maids. Like, we were seen as a house appliance far more than we were as people. And so when you have that kind of objectification where you are in a subservient position, I think we're facing a different form today. But I think that rape is a signifier of a contradiction to your statement.
Okay, so again, I think her name popped up. My apologies, everyone, but it's really challenging for me because it's hard for me to understand what the perspective is. And I think her perspective is that there's less rape, therefore there's less objectification, therefore women are more empowered today. And again, as we said, there's more objectification to me in our society today of women. She did make an interesting point about, back in the 50s, women were treated as this house appliance versus today. Now, this is the problem, I think, and I'm going to pause here for a second. This is the problem. Again, I've said this before. The challenge is, sorry, the sun is like right on my face, so my apologies. This is the problem I see, again, on the right and the left, when you're not specific with your references, right? So, yes, you can say things in general terms about like women in the 1950s being treated as house appliances. It has to be rooted in some form of study, of data, etc. And I think, to be honest, and I don't know if there's studies there, but I would love to know if there are studies from the 50s about women and their overall happiness and their role within society. And again, I'm sure there are studies. I'm just not aware of them. But that would have helped substantiate this person's point and would have added to more of like a strong debate. But to be honest, when you think in these very like kind of surface level understandings of an entire time period and of an entire gender, right? Like that doesn't do great justice to an honest conversation. The sun's right in my face, folks. I might continue just for a little bit more, and then we'll probably have to pause it. Sorry. I did not expect the sun to be in my eyes at this time, but let's keep going and see how long it can go for.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It doesn't make sense, but I do want to rebut it on a couple of points. So first, I just want to say, suggesting that objectification has gone downward since the 1950s is wild. That's just a firm no. That is not the truth, and that's not true.
Wait, so do you feel
But hold on, let me answer your second thing.
Okay.
Second thing, you then brought up, okay, women were at home, but they were pill popping. Well, you then have to acknowledge we're actually popping more pills now, right? So we have actually increased our amount of pill popping. Women are having overdoses on opioids. And on top of that, since I think 1999, by rate, we are increasing our opioid use compared to men. So women are not popping pills less because we're going into the workforce. That's actually not true at all either. We're also, like I said to you, consuming alcohol more and binge drinking more than we did in the
This would have been a great opportunity to bring up birth control, because I don't know if Candace will talk about this in further claims, but I would argue that birth control has done a real number on women's mental and emotional health. And it's not like they're sitting at home popping pills because they're bored. I think, to be honest, there's a lot of things, a lot of prescriptions that are targeted to women, birth control obviously being one of them, that, not targeted, but for women, that have so many side effects that nobody wants to talk about, that has forced women into taking pills, doing things, trying to, quote, be normal as a result of birth control. I really hope this person brings this up as a topic, because I'd love to know what Candace thinks about that. But let's keep it going.
The 1950s, which is why I was trying to get her to say, we need to look at actually give me any reasonable metric of how we can define happiness. Because it's hard, right? Are you happy? Yes or no?
Sure, but wait, hold on. We're actually avoiding what my original point was about rape being the signifier.
Okay, pause. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Again, I think like using rape as an indicator of that is not a fulsome debate.
Hi.
Hi,
I like your hat.
Whitney Shanahan. Nice to meet you. I am fascinated by your claim that women have lost happiness since the sexual revolution, since the 1950s. Do you think that there's any tie to happiness and freedom and happiness and choice?
Mm-hmm.
Because since 1950s, since the sexual revolution, women have gotten exponentially more freedom and more choice. And for me, as a mother and as a woman, having the freedom to choose what I do, to make my own destiny, makes me infinitely more happy than, say, back before the sexual revolution, when I couldn't get a bank account, couldn't get a home loan, couldn't work outside the home, couldn't travel around without a man, couldn't control my own reproduction. So I feel that happiness personally, my belief is tied to our ability to have freedom. And I think that in the United States, protecting freedom and our individual freedoms is what's going to lead us to happiness.
Very interesting comment. Or question. I would actually challenge that. So I think in the West, so I think it's a big topic. I think we typically think that happiness and freedom correlate. It very well may not be the case. And I think about countries where, I think the sun's like cooling down a bit. I think about countries where women lack freedom, but are they still happy? And there are way too many other, again, confounding variables to factor in, class being perhaps most important, right? Like if you're in a lower class, maybe that's actually a bigger deal than if you are in a higher class. But I would not argue that happiness and freedom are naturally correlated. I don't think that if you're more happy because you have more freedom. I don't know that to be true. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but that's what I would surmise. And you might be asking why. And the reason why is because too much freedom actually might make you unhappy and less stable as a person. I'm being completely honest. I know that sounds pretty wild, but here's a perfect example. And I don't want to make this all about like a political thing, right? But I think back to the pandemic of 2020. I can't tell you how many people were at the end of it when I was talking to them about, the vaccine and taking the vaccine and social distancing. And when I was really trying to unpack, why are we doing this? Like what's at the root of it? Where's the research to back this up? Why are we mandated to wear masks? Why are we mandated to be socially? People were just getting really frustrated. Most people were getting really frustrated with my line of questioning. And when I brought up, hey, hang on, there's civil liberties and freedoms that are being trampled on in the face of this existential threat or this threat that is COVID. People got really upset. And so that to me is where happiness and freedom, like I think there's, I should back up this for a second, but I do think that there's a certain level of freedom if you have no freedom that would tie to some form of happiness. But beyond that, I don't know if it still continues to be correlated, right? So if you're from some totalitarian community and women are severely restricted, any form of freedom may actually make you a bit more happier. But too much freedom may actually make you less happy, and you may actually be looking to government to create structure and a rights system and a very constrained box for you to operate in, because too much freedom would allow too many people to say too many things. And I use the example of the pandemic because there's a clear example of, if you started questioning all the things government was doing and you had open conversations about that, most people were getting really frustrated. They did not want to have those conversations. They just wanted to know, okay, am I staying home from work? Okay, do I have to wear a mask? How do I get my kids to school? Is the school open? Why is the school not open? People were just very much more focused on their day-to-day than focused on the bigger questions about why we're doing the things that we're doing, even though it directly related to our rights and freedoms as citizens. So all that to say, happiness and freedoms may be correlated at the initial outset from a totalitarian system to a more free society. But then again, as we expand those freedoms, I don't know if happiness continues to be correlated. Let's see how Candace responds to that.
Did you go to college?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Did you?
So yes, I did. So you have a degree.
Absolutely.
Now, when you went to college, did you go to college because it was simply something that you wanted to do? Or did you think that I have to go to college because in order to get a job, I have to have a college degree?
I went to college for art because I was fascinated with art.
Okay. It's just answering my question. Did you go to college? Was that the only reason you went to college? Or did you think that I might want to do something in art, so I have to go to college like for my career?
I went to school because I wanted to expand my horizons. I mean, I think that's why most people go to university.
So this is where I feel like the conversation is going to dovetail. You see, instead of understanding, again, answering the question of happiness and its correlation to freedom, Candace instead goes down the position of, did you go to school? And I think I know what she's going to start saying. she's going to start saying that, well, if you went to school, then there was an economic pressure because you wanted to go and financially stabilize yourself and be financially successful. I gather from the person she's talking to, this person did not have the financial pressure, it doesn't sound like, that most all of us have when entering college and university. So it's going to be the two of them talking past each other. Again, to me, there's a real strong indication here that it could have gone down the path of happiness and freedom and where those two dovetail, but instead it's going down this path of you go to school to get a job to be financially stable, and that's why you go to school. It's a very transactional relationship. It's very common, again, arguments on the right and some on the left too, but like I don't think this does well for the claim.
Yeah,
why did
that's
you
actually,
go?
That's actually not
Why
true.
did
A lot
you
of
go?
I went, and I think a lot of people go because there's a pressure that if you don't go to college, you're going to be a failure.
It's a choice. Everything's a choice. So
Okay.
taking away choices doesn't make people happier.
Yeah,
Taking
but
away
I'm
freedom doesn't make people happier.
I'm disagreeing with you on the idea that people are feeling more free by financial pressure. I think financial pressure makes people feel remarkably less free.
So you
How
want
did I
no
know
bank
this was
accounts
gonna
again,
happen?
women not to have credit cards?
I'm
no
not
bank
saying that
accounts?
women shouldn't have access to credit cards or banking accounts. You're
Well,
putting
that-
words in my mouth, so why don't you respond to the words that I'm saying?
Well, less
Um,
financial pressure. If I don't have a bank account, that's a lot less financial
what
pressure,
I'm
I guess,
saying is
right?
that financial pressure in terms of most people that go to college, and I'm counting myself among them, it's because typically in order to get the job that you're being sold
I
is going to
knew
make
it.
you infinitely
How did I
happier
know that
and
was gonna
infinitely more
happen?
free. It just requires a college degree. And most of these people, to be clear, have to put themselves, the majority of people have to put themselves into debt. And I don't think anybody would describe debt as a form of freedom, right? I don't think anybody would realistically say,
Let's get back to happiness. So
No,
we're
no.
here to talk
See, so,
about
like-
happiness
No, but you-
and how the sexual revolution,
Okay.
and we're not talking about college debt.
I think it's important because we're
See-
talking about freedom. You just said,
How could I didn't even watch this clip and I already knew where it was going. And again, the person Candace is debating cannot relate to debt because it doesn't look like she had the same, it doesn't sound like, I shouldn't say sound like she had the same pressure that most all of us have, or came out with like, say, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. So Candace is talking past her because that wasn't her point. She's talking past Candace because she's focused on freedom, and Candace is now going to show the correlation between school and financial freedom or financial benefit or whatever.
that the reason why I feel happy is because I have more freedom. And I am saying that financial restraints
go.
and debt doesn't make people feel more free.
So let's
I'm
let's
countering-
eliminate the debt.
Well,
Let's
let's-
eliminate college debt.
let's-
Maybe we should have free
Well,
college here in the
okay.
U.S. That sounds great.
So,
Great idea, Candace.
now-
I love that idea.
All right.
Okay.
Love it. Woo! Champion for the people, girl. Very nice.
All right, return to your seat.
Surrounded.
So I could continue, but I feel like it would be more intense, and I am at the 45-minute mark. So I just want to stop there. But again, this is where I see challenges on the left and the right. Generally speaking, I think Candace, the statement isn't defined, and that leads to a lot of ambiguity. That's the challenge Candace finds herself in. She's not defining the terms that she's using in a clear way. I've also noticed with Candace too is that when she is pushed, she then resorts to like her own experience, which is great, but it has to be on the basis of some type of trend that she's noticed in society. I'm not saying you have to have stats to back up everything that you're saying, but if you're going to make broad generalizations, it has to be grounded in some way. And Candace does struggle with that. Likewise, those who are debating her, again, I've noticed there's emotional, sometimes, people do get emotional. Zena was great, I think, at really pushing Candace on a few things. But I think some of the arguments against Candace talk past her point, which, again, unlike Zena, if you just focus in on what Candace is saying, you'll actually find holes in her argument. If you push her on define and infinitely less happy, Candace really does struggle there. So, this is supposed to be a bit more of a structured debate. Candace needs to substantiate her claims, and those challenging her need to challenge her clearly on what she's saying. Don't focus too much on broader, and this goes for both the right and the left. Don't focus too much on your interpretation of broader trends, right? you have to make it very specific. If you make it too broad, your point gets lost and it gets like very confusing to follow. And I think this also ties back into data collection. And I know this sounds very boring, but if you're in a room with Candace Owens or Jordan Peterson and you have a chance to actually sit in front of them and debate them, you need to rest your arguments on sound data, right? Often we conflate things, we make generalizations. Zena even pointed to like happiness index in Nordic countries. She has to be more, if you're going to use that, you have to be more specific. And you have to be open to understanding these are different cultures. I know like Nordic countries are similar to the West in some respects, but in others they're not. And culture plays a major factor in how people respond to surveys, how they respond to sending their own data. Remember, surveys are based on sample sizes of people willing to share their data. It's not necessarily reflective unless the sample size is reflective of the general population. So you have to remind yourself of that. And also, the other thing, when you cite too much data, you got to remember too, people typically may or may not submit the correct data to you. So for example, I live in Toronto, downtown Toronto. If I were to go out on the street and ask people what they thought of the sexual revolution, like without like any real like parameters, I'd get a whole host of different results, but generally along the lines of the sexual revolution was good. But if I give them more like structure to that conversation, they may second guess their initial response. They may actually provide me with a more detailed response, or they may say, I don't know, I don't want to get into this, which actually would be the majority of people. And so you have to look at the data and the robustness of the data that's being presented. And if you want to use it, you have to then be very specific on how you're using it. But instead, that should not be the strategy. The strategy should instead be pushing Candace on the terms that she's used to define her statement and then unraveling her opinion from there. Okay, folks, those are my initial comments on how I would typically view Candace Owens, or how I would do the first segment of Candace Owens Surrounded. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you find this informative, helpful? Would you like more of these types of videos? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. As always, my name is Christopher Balkaran. I'm here for open and honest dialogue, something we're sorely missing today. So leave a comment, like, share, subscribe, tell all your friends. Thanks, everyone, and I'll catch you in the next one.